is Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich, a live listener call-in show where we share the stories of everyday Orthodox people as we get to know the members of the body of Christ. Join the conversation. We invite you to call in with questions at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346.
Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. It is June 20th, 2021, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich here wishing you a blessed Pentecost on this wonderful feast day, and also, of course, a happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and also to anyone who's missing their father and all of those different complicated things that come up on holidays like this. But actually, tonight I do think we'll be talking about parenting quite a bit. So hold on for that. You know, we're here every Sunday night talking to a new Orthodox Christian. And I find Orthodox people so interesting. I love to go to coffee hours at different churches and just sort of sit down and start asking questions of someone, because you find people have great stories in the Orthodox Church. You know, of course, a lot of people have immigrated from faraway lands. So you'll meet one person who's born in Palestine and another from Greece and all sorts of interesting people. And then, of course, you have a lot of people who were raised in immigrant families. And frankly, they always have interesting stories. They always have something either wonderful or impressive or hilarious going on. And of course, we also have a lot of converts. A lot of us have come to the faith in different ways, including myself. And I find that every convert story is different as well. So here we are, all, you know, with so much in common, all Orthodox, all doing the same services and worshiping with the same traditions. And yet, you know, we speak different languages, and you might be in a different jurisdiction. You could have people right down the street from you who are Orthodox and not realize it because they go to a different kind of Orthodox parish. So I think it's neat to get together and get to know one another. So here we are. Matushka Trudy Richter is here, and she's producing the show, and she'll be taking your calls. And I'm here, of course, with Brandi Willis Schreiber. Now, Brandi is actually a friend of mine. I'm very excited about tonight's show because Brandi is actually she's an author. She's also a convert, as I was mentioning. I think she's a convert. We'll have to ask. But at any rate, I've gotten the chance to meet Brandi before, and she is just lovely, and I love talking with her, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. Now, you're welcome to join the show as well. As I mentioned, Matushka's taking your phone calls. Call anytime at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And so without any further ado, Brandi, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on your show tonight. Thank you.
Well, I'm so excited. I'm thrilled. Ever since the first time we got to sit in the airport, I think at Love Field or wherever we were for like an hour and have a nice long conversation, it was so nice. And so I'm excited. I've been looking forward to getting to hang out with you again ever since then.
I know, it's been too long. It's been several years, much too long.
It really has. And I know when we were talking, you were, I think, just beginning to work on your book, which has recently come out. It's called A Long Walk with Mary. And so that just was released by Ancient Faith Publishing. So I want to make sure everyone knows that. I'm going to put the link up on our Facebook page if anybody's looking for it. But of course, it's at the Ancient Faith store. But I think you're going to really enjoy Brandi tonight. To my audience, I'm speaking right now, I should say. But I think you guys, this is really a treat for me, Brandi, because I already know you and enjoy you, and that's always a little bit extra special. But okay, let's start at the beginning. So you have you been in West Texas all your life? Am I right about that?
Pretty much, yes. I was born here in Lubbock, and I lived all over West Texas in a lot of different towns growing up. My father was a band director, and so we moved from small West Texas town to small West Texas town, you know, every now and then. So I've lived pretty much all over the South Plains and up in the Texas Panhandle, except for about a year when my husband and I were in Topeka, Kansas. He was in law school at Washburn University, and I lived up there obviously with him because we were married. And then we knew we wanted to come back to Texas after he finished law school. And I ended up getting a job much earlier than I anticipated. So I was able to help transition us back to Texas. So other than that brief foray into Kansas, I have lived in West Texas my entire life.
That's wonderful. And it's funny because people do not sing the praises of West Texas quite often enough, but it really is. It's a beautiful place. It's really neat, but it has a certain, I don't know, sort of it's a unique place. And I think that people too often just kind of drive right through and don't even,
Yes.
like, they're
And
just like, oh, it was a really long drive to Santa Fe. And you're like, but did you slow down
yes.
and look around?
And that is something that I am really passionate about because I think there are a lot of beautiful things about West Texas. I think it was St. Anthony said in his writings, stay where you are. That was one of the things that he talked about in his great writings. And so when I was growing up here, I think I really hated it because, oh my gosh, it's so boring and it's a small West Texas town and everybody's the same. But as you get older, if you choose to, you start to really look for those things of beauty. And I really love living here because there's so much history. There's so much, natural beauty that is not for everybody. You've got to be able to embrace a bit of heat and things that stick and bite you and a little bit of desolation. But, as we know, being Orthodox, desolation is where we can meet God. And so
That's
I think
right.
there's a lot of wonderful things about West Texas. And so I tried to sing its praises a lot in A Long Walk with Mary because living here and being here, I'm choosing to find the beauty in it. And there is a lot of beauty to be found if you come out this way. So if you are making a drive across the South Plains of West Texas, and you're thinking this is so flat and boring, I would beg you to stop and maybe take my book along with you and read it aloud in the car and
Right?
find that some moments of beauty because it really is fantastic.
It really is. And I do love how you talked about it in A Long Walk with Mary because you were really experiencing the seasons throughout that
Mm-hmm.
year and talking about the ways that the seasons changed and the migratory birds and different, just sort of looking for the beauty and sort of standing
Mm-hmm.
still and listening for it. And it was really lovely. And it inspires me because I think so often we forget about the beauty of our own surroundings and where we are, and it's like, oh, where are you going to go on vacation, and let's think of beautiful places to go travel. And even when you live in
Yes.
a beautiful place, you forget that it's beautiful.
Yeah, true.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's go back to your childhood. So your dad's a band director. Now I know that in Texas right now, I feel like band is a big competitive sport, essentially, and that I know where I am, it's a big deal whether the band wins and goes to state or not and all of that. But I feel like back in the day, it wasn't so much. It was much more like, oh, you're teaching the kids how to play instruments. That's wonderful. What was it like for your dad? Was it a big competitive thing in Texas, like being a football coach who's traveling around, or was it calmer?
Um, I think for him, being a band director was a big passion. He was always very much in love with music. He died in 2010. And so all of my earliest memories are growing up with that smell of band halls. You got the brassy smell of the trumpets and the tubas and the trombones and late Friday nights where you were going to all the football games and you're either listening to the band, or if you were in the band like I was, you're playing in the band and you don't get home until you're exhausted, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And so it's really a big deal, I think, in Texas, and it should be because we need the music and we need the arts and we need children and youth to learn these things because they're disappearing from a lot of our educational settings. But it was just a lifelong passion of his. He loved it. He was a wonderful band director and made lots of connections, and I think influenced a lot of kids' lives over the years. And so it was pretty sweet memories growing up with that as his profession.
Oh, that is really neat. And may his memory be eternal. It's nice to get a chance to
Thank
talk to him
you.
a little bit or talk about him a little bit on Father's
It
Day.
is nice. Thank you.
That's lovely. It's very sweet. But you're absolutely right. The prevalence of band in places like Texas is great because we don't have that problem. I know a lot of people, my family in California, for instance, they'll talk about how there's not enough music education in
Hmm.
school. And it's like, well, because you don't have that band culture. Like
Right. Because
you
you need
need
that
to
football culture.
embrace it. Exactly, right? Like you gotta start thinking about extracurriculars some more. But
Exactly.
so what did you play in band?
I started off on the clarinet and was terrible at it. And then I switched to the flute because honestly, it was lighter. It was easier to carry on the bus and home from school. So it was a very practical choice, but I enjoyed it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and I bet you were kind of a petite little teen, and it was probably a lot to be hauling
True.
a tuba around. Absolutely. So what else did you like doing as a kid?
Oh, well, I was an introvert. So my big thing was reading and writing and living in my head and creating stories. I could get lost in books for days. And then, of course, all of my little um, imaginative escapades that I would create for myself. I'd be outside a lot. Um, but yeah, for me as a kid, it really was a lot of reading and writing. And I was very, very grateful for that because one of the first big gifts I remember receiving was my Aunt San for Christmas. I said I wanted some books, and she bought me a box of all these classic novels, Nathaniel Hawthorne and Louisa May
Oh, wow.
Alcott and the Little House in the Big Woods series, Laura Ingalls Wilder. And so that really kicked it off for me. And I read a lot. And then I guess once I got into school, kind of got a little bit older, got into a little bit of drama, have to do the one act play stuff. And in Texas, as you were mentioning, we have a lot of competitive things, but we have
Hmm.
this thing called UIL, University Interscholastic League, I think it's what it stands for. But it's a
Yep.
chance for students to participate and to compete against each other in all of these different areas of both humanities, debate. They had this thing when I was in elementary school. It was called storytelling. And what they would do was you would sit in a room and someone would read a story and you would compete with other students to remember what the story was. And then you would recite it back in front of a panel of judges.
That's
I
right.
know
My
that
kids
sounds
do
like a
that.
great time, but do they do
I
that?
know the poor judges who are listening to the same story over and over again. But
No,
yeah, my kids all do storytelling. They love it, when
I
they're in
loved
elementary
it,
school,
right?
and
It was
and
so
it's like
great.
who can remember the details, but also who can like tell it in an engaging way when they get in there. Who
Yes,
impresses the judges? Yeah, it's all kinds of
exactly.
it's wonderful, and lots of writing and story. There are also some where I
Hmm.
think they show them pictures and you have to make up a story. And
Uh-huh.
that's neat. Who has
It was
competitive
wonderful.
writing, right? Like who does that? That's
I don't
awesome.
know. And then in
That's
high
so great.
school, they had poetry, so I competed in poetry, and that's where you worked with a teacher or a coach. And I had a wonderful one. I have to mention her, Frances Pipkin. She made a huge impact on me in high school, and we would do a theme each year that I competed, and she would help me pick out the poems that I would read. And I think you picked out three or four, and you basically had to recite them in a very not dramatic way, but you had to have some emotionality behind it because you wanted to have the judges feel and be moved by what you were reading. And so that was definitely, I think, an entry for me to study creative writing in college. If I hadn't had those experiences, I definitely wouldn't have pursued the arts the way that I did. So it's
Oh,
really
that's
cool.
neat. That
So
is really
those are
cool.
things
That's
I did as a
lovely.
kid.
You know what? That is really funny because as I met, my kids do all of that stuff, and it never really occurred to me like how inspiring that can be and what it means to say to the kids like this is a valuable way for you to spend your time. It matters. There's a teacher who's going to take an hour a week to coach you, and you're going to compete because it matters if you can tell
It
stories
mattered.
and if you can recite poetry.
Yes.
And I never really thought about that, but that is truly a valuable thing. I need to go thank those teachers who've been coaching my kids.
There
But
you go.
oh, that's neat. That's really neat. So when you went to school, you majored in creative art. What did you major in?
Well, when I first went to college, I majored in nursing.
Ah,
And
okay.
I had a year left of nursing school, and I quit. I realized I do not want to do this as a career. I had worked in a nursing home throughout high school. That was my part time job. And so, not really knowing what to do when I went to college, I thought, yeah, I'll go be a nurse. My mom was an LVN and a licensed vocational nurse. And so I was like, yeah, I could go do that. And worked really hard, got into nursing school here at Texas Tech, and realized that I hated it. I was great reading all of the textbooks and understanding the diseases, and I could do all of that great. But when I got into the clinical setting, it was a nightmare. I was not strong at that. And I realized pretty quickly, I don't think I can do this for 8 or 12 hours a day. And so I thought I kind of had a little bit of a crisis, and realized that I need to do something different. And if I do something different, what am I going to do that's going to make me happy? And so I quit nursing school, changed my major to English, had a wonderful time with it. Then I went on to grad school and focused on an MA, a Master of Arts, in literature with an emphasis in creative writing and poetry, and had a wonderful time. But I was under no illusions that I was going to be able to do this as a career. So when I was in grad school, I had other jobs too. I was an AmeriCorps member for a little while, and I worked at a wonderful nonprofit here in Lubbock for a while. And I knew that when I graduated, I would need to have something else in place to pay the bills. And so worked in nonprofit, and then I worked at Texas Tech for a long time with students with disabilities. That's what my big career was that I just recently left after over 10 years. But yeah, it's kind of a winding, curving path there. It isn't
Well,
all of life that way.
it is. And I think it's so good to hear you talk about that because I feel like I know so many young people who go into college and they get through, a couple of years, they go, and all of a sudden they start to realize like, this is not the thing I'm meant to do. Like I'm
Mhm,
not good at this or I hate it or
mhm.
it isn't the thing. Right. And sometimes in life that's how it is, but we keep going and we try other things and see it all turns out fine. It all just
It
works out.
does. It's going to be fine. If
Absolutely.
anybody is listening to this and you don't know what you're going to do with your life, it's okay. You will figure it out. I'm still figuring it out too, and I'm 40.
Right? I think we all are. I think, sometimes as parents, we're not very good at admitting it to our kids, like, no, we're all, because it's like, oh, it's going to cost a lot of money to stay in school or what. You know what? It works out fine in the end. It really is okay. So you went to Tech. Were you, and of course you're in Lubbock now. We should clarify. Texas
Hmm.
Tech
Hmm.
is in Lubbock. And it is, so that's West Texas, that's local. So were you living
Hmm.
in Lubbock and you went to, was it kind of like an obvious, like, I'm going to go to Tech because it's right here? Or did you not want to leave home? How was that in your head?
Well, I went to high school I mentioned we kind of moved around a lot. I graduated high school from Spearman, Texas, which is just way north up here in the Panhandle. And I actually went to Abilene Christian University, which is a Church of Christ affiliated school in Abilene, Texas, for a year.
Sure.
And that wasn't a good fit for me. That wasn't a good fit either. I really wanted something that was going to be a little bit broader in terms of an educational experience. And I had a good friend on my floor, and she said, hey, I'm going to transfer to Tech and I'm looking for a roommate. And she was like, you should look into Tech too. I'm like, okay, sure, let's do that. So it was a great, very serendipitous experience, though. I'm glad that it worked out that way because I absolutely loved my experience at Texas Tech University. It was wonderful. I really did well with a large public institution. I liked having a wide variety of experiences and exposure to professors and ideas and people who thought like me, but especially people who didn't think like me. I actually appreciated that more. And I felt like I got a really great education and I made the most of it. So I really enjoyed being in school. It was a good experience for me for sure, being here
Uh,
at Tech.
that's excellent. That's excellent. Okay. So there you are, as you said, nursing, no, not nursing, and then, moving around a bit. But so what was your first job out of school? What exactly was it like and
Oh.
how, what was it? Where were you living? Were you living back with your parents? Were you able to move out and go to college and just be on your own from there?
Yes, I was able to. I really wanted to be out of my parents. I graduated from high school in Spearman, and when I ended up in Lubbock, my parents eventually followed, and so they lived here and were here while I was going to school here in Lubbock and working. And so I moved in with them off and on here and there, like in between different living situations. But the first job that I had after I graduated from college, you mean, is that the one that you're talking
Yeah.
about? Not
Yeah.
my first job ever.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Well, my first job was actually working as a youth volunteer coordinator at the Volunteer Center of Lubbock here in Lubbock, Texas. And it's a nonprofit that coordinates opportunities for volunteerism across a wide variety of agencies in our area. And so my job was working with youth to get them involved civically through volunteer efforts. And we worked a lot with our local United Way and basically got youth and families and schools connected to opportunities. And that was really, really fun. I had a wonderful boss who I still keep in touch with today. She's fabulous. A great pillar of the community here in Lubbock. And that's what I did. And then after that, by that time, I got married to my husband, David. He was in law school, as I mentioned. And so I worked very briefly as an admissions counselor at Washburn University, and then came back to work at the Volunteer Center of Lubbock when we relocated back to Lubbock, back to Texas, where we wanted to be, and then went on to a tenured career with Texas Tech University, working with students with disabilities. So kind of all over the place, in case you can't tell. Life has not been linear.
It is and it isn't though, right? Because all of those jobs are really about helping young people sort things out, aren't they? Like
Yeah, they
about,
really were.
helping kids figure out where to volunteer or helping, helping them navigate various different things. So there's definitely a theme, right? Like you're working with young adults and you're helping them sort things out. That's actually kind of a beautiful gift, and it's that's a neat niche. I think that would be fun. I would like stuff like that. That sounds good. But
You'd be good at it.
I think, well, I think you were probably pretty good at it. But okay, so when you mentioned that your parents followed you to Lubbock, did they like intentionally follow you to Lubbock, or was it just you were living in Lubbock and then your dad got a job as a band director there?
No, they followed me. I was okay with it. I cherish that time now because my dad's been gone for quite a while, and I have really good memories of them being here during that time, and I realize now how precious that experience was, having a chance to be close to them for those years. But
But at
yeah,
the
they
time, you
definitely.
didn't see it, or did you
I
like at the
think I
time? Was
think
it
at
that
the
clear?
time I think at the time I was a busy, self-absorbed college student who was
Yep.
figuring out what she wanted to do, and she was working, and had access all of a sudden to this great big life, and I wanted to live it. And so I don't think I appreciated it in the moment. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, I think
But
it's
we
so true
learned.
because when you're young, you feel like, no, I'm out here making my way and I've got to make my way alone. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
you can make your way alone and still have dinner with your parents on Sunday night. Like it's really
And
not.
how special is that? How
Yeah,
special is that?
it is. It's beautiful to have a family that loves you. Then you can go back and bounce all those things off of them and check in with them. It's lovely.
Yeah.
Now, were you an only child? Is that why they're following you
Mhm.
around? Yes.
Mhm. Yep.
That's excellent. Now, so I imagine it seems like your dad must have been awfully young when he passed away in 2010. Is that right?
He was 59.
Ooh, yeah, that is very young. May his memory be eternal. What
Thank you.
what happened, if you don't mind my asking? I mean, it's so wonderful that you got those years together. What cut it all short?
He had an unexpected heart attack that he wasn't aware of. He knew something had
Oh,
happened, that he was commuting to a small community outside of Lubbock where he was a band director. And one day he was driving to work and started having some chest pains and pulled over, and realized, okay, I probably need to go over here, to this local clinic. And so got checked out. Then they did the typical thing where they refer you to the bigger hospital, and you've got to go and get a bunch of tests done. And so they did stress tests and all of that, and turned out that he had had a heart attack, and had some blocked arteries. And so they went in to open those up with some stents, and the stents started failing, and so they had to do a bypass surgery, and he died right after he got out of surgery. So it was
Oh,
really quick. It was a really quick, very unexpected um,
yeah. Yeah.
passing. Yeah.
Well, but yeah, I mean, a lot of people go through that, right? Where they have a heart attack of some kind and it reveals this trouble and they go through the surgeries
Hmm.
and usually it's fine, right? Usually they come back and they just eat better and everything's okay. But every once in a while they don't, and
And
that's
and
a
this
terrible shame.
and this wasn't fine. The morning that he died on in a day in September, and oh my gosh, I might start crying on your show, but you know what? It's
I'm
okay because
sorry.
it's
Well,
Father's
it's
Day. No, no,
Father's
no, it's
Day. I feel
okay.
like we
This
should
is
talk
good.
about
No,
him a
no,
little.
no. The morning of his surgery, there's this beautiful September light that we have here. And in the morning, it's just this kind of gold filtered light. And I was driving to work that morning, and the light was coming in my windshield, and I thought to myself, I wonder if this is the day that my dad's going to die. And
Wow.
when I got in the evening, my mom was frantically calling and saying, come up to the hospital room. And so when we got there, he was coding, and there were a lot of students because the hospital where he passed away is a teaching hospital, University Medical Center here in Lubbock. And so there were a lot of students, and there were people in the room working on him. And there was, I'll never forget, there was, I don't know if he was an intern or a doctor, but he was using um, a clipboard on his chest, giving him chest compressions. He was trying to get leverage on my dad's chest. And so he was using a clipboard and doing chest compressions. And I remember turning away from that, and I looked out the window, and there was that same golden September light filtering through the window that was facing west. So I saw the light coming in the east, and I turned away and I saw the light going in the west. And
Oh
that was
gosh.
how
Ah,
he passed in that moment. And so I'll never
isn't that
forget that as
amazing?
long as I live. Yeah, and I think a lot about that, especially when September rolls
Right.
around, you see that light that you
Absolutely.
can't quite escape.
No,
That
you know what? I
yeah.
know just what you mean. I absolutely, and that's so amazing that you could kind of feel it early on and then you saw it again and there's just that it's just sort of full circle and complete and this sense of like, yes, that's what this day was, sunrise
Yeah.
to sunset. Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You're the only person I've ever heard talk about the light on a day that someone died, except so when my son died, I remember the
Mm.
light outside, and every May I see that light and I go,
Oh,
yep, yep, this is the time of day. We're here. We're in that like those last weeks of
right.
May, and that's what the
Uh-huh.
light looks like at 4:30. And it just
It sticks with you.
it does. It does. What an interesting, quiet detail to be carrying around. That's really quite beautiful. And of
Well,
course,
thank you.
Christ is the light, right? So sometimes
Yes.
God speaks to us that way,
He was
I
there.
guess.
And I also think he was there in a pack of Marlboro Reds, because the little chaplain guy that came up to our room after my dad had died, you're in that like survival mode, and you're like, okay, there's things that have to happen. And the hospital staff is asking you all these questions, and they say, do you want a chaplain? And I'm like, yes, I want a chaplain. And so it was me, it was my husband and my mom, and they sent up this little scrawny, I think he was 90 years old. He was just shuffling along, and bless his heart. That's what we say here. Bless his heart. And
Yep.
in his pocket, his front pocket, he had this bright red pack of Marlboro Reds. And I was like, I'm never going to forget that either. And he gathered us around, and he said a prayer over us. And, by that time, I'm Orthodox. My husband and I are both Orthodox by that time. Um, and I'll just never forget that either. The lights were down in the room, and here's my dad, and here's us, and this little guy with this throaty coffee phlegmy voice
This man who's
praying
been
over us.
smoking Marlboro Reds for 85 years,
And I
perhaps.
loved it. I loved it. I was like, this is perfect. This is some grace right here, because I think if we had been sent someone that was a little bit more formal and maybe cold. I hate to use that word, but that kind of
Hmm.
formality that comes from people,
Yeah.
sometimes it would have been much more difficult. So
Isn't that lovely? It's really lovely. Well, I'm glad that we have an opportunity to talk about your dad on Father's
thank
Day. I think
you.
that's really neat.
Thank
And may
you.
his memory be eternal. And
And your
so
sons
we're going
as
to
well.
go. Thank you. Let's go to a short break and then we'll come back and I want to get back to all of this. I want to hear more about what's going on with you and what your story is. So,
Okay.
we will be right back with Everyday Orthodox in just a few minutes.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio.
No end of books these days offer us techniques for self-improvement. But in the newest release from the Ancient Faith store, Gratitude in Life's Trenches, Robin Phillips takes a different tack. He shows us that God meets us where we are, in the pain and heartache of the present moment. Instead of looking for a way to escape from hardship, we can cultivate an attitude of gratitude, peace, and self-acceptance that will transform our experience of suffering. Drawing on his own experiences and his work as a consultant in the behavioral health industry, as well as stories of saints and sufferers, teachings of the fathers, and recent discoveries in neuroscience, Phillips shows us that the journey to personal well-being is one we can all travel, regardless of the hardships we may face. To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight talking to Brandi Willis Schreiber. She wrote the very beautiful A Long Walk with Mary. And we're going to be talking about A Long Walk with Mary actually in the next few minutes here. But I do want to invite our audience. If you want to join the conversation, you're welcome to call in at 1-855-AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. Okay, so you mentioned that you were already Orthodox at that time. What was the faith of your parents? What were you raised with?
We were raised, I was raised, I'm including my husband in this conversation, although he's not in the room. Church of Christ. So Protestant, evangelical Church of Christ. And with that, I'm very grateful that I had this wonderful foundation of faith, because my grandparents were very devoted. All of my dad's family was very devoted. Both of my parents were wonderful in that regard. But I always kind of felt growing up like there was something more, there was something missing. I kind of had this response to everything that we did of, well, who says this? Says who, according to whom? How do we know this is what we're supposed to be doing? And I just felt like there was a big chunk of something missing. So to make a very long story short, after my husband and I were married, we really knew that we needed to find a church home, and we knew that we wanted to explore something other than the Church of Christ. And so we tried going to a Lutheran church. We tried going to things that had a little bit more liturgy in them. And gradually, he reached a point where he was like, you know what? Why don't you just try that church down the street? And by that point, he was still living in Topeka, finishing up his law degree. And I was here in Lubbock. And so I was like, okay. And I didn't know what it was. It was some church that said St. Andrew Greek Orthodox Church on the side. And so I walk in.
You just walked in blind to an Orthodox church?
Listen.
That's amazing.
Nobody
ever does that.
I walked in blind to an Orthodox church with a Bible under my arm. So
of course you did.
That's
right.
The word, So
that's
anyway,
right.
And all of a sudden, you're just completely overwhelmed with everything. I think I stopped dead in my tracks and looked around, and, here's candles, here's icons, here's smells, here's colors. I was just completely inundated. So I sat on the back pew of our very small church, and I think I just drifted through that entire service because I was so enthralled with what was happening. And afterwards, our priest mentioned that there was going to be a coffee hour in the little parish hall right next door. So I stayed for that too, go big or go home,
Wow.
right? And
Right.
at the coffee hour, I'll never forget, Father Peter, our much beloved priest, said, well, if we see you again, that's great. And if we don't, I wish you well. And I was like, wait a minute, you're not going to chase me out into the parking lot and try to get me to
Right.
join? It was
Right.
very refreshing to me. And so I told my husband about it, and he started going to an Orthodox church in Topeka while I went to our Orthodox church here in Lubbock. And
Wow.
what was fascinating and just absolutely mind-blowing for us is that we could talk about the reading for that day, which was the same everywhere in the world. What is that? And then
Wow.
compare, notes about, what did your priest say about this today? Or what did your priest say? And gradually we came to the conclusion that this is something that's pretty special. This is a big deal. We really need to look into this. And I think it was less than a year later, we were chrismated. And so
That's
that's kind
amazing.
of, we were
That's
very
lovely.
lucky.
Well, and so when you were looking at churches, you were looking for something liturgical. Do you
I
know
didn't know
why?
it at the time. I think we were really drawn to something richer, something deeper, and something older. And we couldn't put our finger on it, right? But what answers those three needs?
I
The
know.
Orthodox Church
The fact that
answers
you're
those.
looking for something richer, deeper, and older, and you just were like, well, I'll go to the church down the street.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
I know,
Sometimes
right?
God puts us on the right street.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
that is
Absolutely. Yes.
amazing. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. And I love what you're saying about the same reading because it is true. And it's something that I think as Orthodox Christians, you forget that that's amazing and
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. But that consistency, I remember when I was converting, thinking I was pregnant and just thinking, wow, she could
Oh,
walk into any Orthodox church anywhere on earth and be at home. And I was just
yes.
so taken by this idea of something so much larger than us and larger
Mm-hmm.
than just, the one parish and the one pastor and like that pastor leaves and then some other pastor comes and the whole thing's
Mm-hmm.
completely different. That
Mm-hmm.
sense of that changeability and that localness of it. And that it really is, as you mentioned it really is amazing that he could be up in Topeka and you could be down in Lubbock and you could go to
Mm-hmm.
completely different churches, but come out of it talking about the same reading. You experience the
Mm-hmm.
same liturgy.
Yep.
And once you convert, you enter into the same cup. You're in communion with one another, no matter where you are. Oh,
Yep.
it's beautiful. That's lovely. Okay. So you're converting. So it seems like the conversion process was fairly simple. How did your parents feel about this quick conversion? Or even the fact that you weren't going to stick with the Church of Christ? Did they kind of sense that when you left Abilene Christian, or was it a big shock to them?
I don't think it was even on my radar when I left Abilene Christian, but when we started kind of exploring Orthodoxy, I think in most people's experiences, if you have family members that are from a different faith background, a lot of people just don't know what it is. And so when you're talking about these things, I think the thing that immediately jumped to their minds was this looks very Catholic,
Yes.
and that was a concern for them. But we talked through, as best we could and tried to explain as best we could why we were making this decision. But ultimately, it was our decision. And although my dad died very shortly after I converted, and so he didn't get to really experience with me the fullness of that. In the years since then, I think both of our families see how much we love our church and how much we love being Orthodox. And that has given them, I think, hopefully some peace and comfort that we're not lost. You know, that,
Yeah, it's I
and
mean,
maybe
we
even
laugh, but
inspire them
that
a little
is
bit.
this is so much the experience of all of us converts, right? Like, so for those of you listening who I mean, I do find, I have Greek friends and Russian friends and Serbian friends who are always sort of amazed because they're like, well, I had to stay in church or else it would really upset my parents and my grandparents. And we're the opposite, right? Like we come to the Orthodox Church and our parents and grandparents are totally scandalized. But over time, usually I think that's what it is. It's that quiet witness where they see like, you know what? They still love Jesus. They're doing well. They're growing spiritually. It's okay. We haven't totally lost them. So I take it your family did not follow you in conversion.
No.
Yeah, me neither.
My mom's come with me a few times to our church, and I have wonderful in-laws. And so anytime we've had something special at the church, like the baby's baptism, they came to that service, and I think they were really moved by it, which was really special. If someone becomes Orthodox, that's such a joy and such a thing to celebrate. I never would have ever expected or anticipated that I would influence anyone to become Orthodox. And I certainly never did with my family. And my goal was never to be like, I'm Orthodox now, you should be too, because
Right.
honestly, I'd had enough of that in my other background. I had really witnessed some things, the way that people were evangelized to and how they were treated, that really left me feeling uncomfortable. And I did not want to do that on this side of things. And I found that the way Orthodoxy treats missions and things like that to be a lot more kind and refreshing than what I experienced in some of the mission work that I did when I was in my previous faith. And so I'm trying my hardest to choose the kindest and most generous words I can here, but
but there's that sense of like winning souls, right? And like when you're winning something, you're like battling and someone else is losing, and there's a whole thing going on there that is quite different. And I think that quiet Orthodox witness that like preach with words sometimes, however they say that, that it is refreshing when you come from a really heavily evangelistic background. It is very beautiful. But I always think that's so amazing. You meet people and they're like, well, I became Orthodox and then my whole family was Orthodox and then all of their friends were Orthodox. And you're like, yeah, I don't have that experience. I can't really relate to that. But
if one, I think I've seen this, if there's something that I share or maybe something that I write or that just gives people a little bit of interest or just kind of tweaks the way, not even that they think about things, but maybe that they interact with things. If there's just a softening of how people interact with, for example, the idea of Mary or an icon or, a faith system that has some different holidays or feasts that you may not be familiar with. That is all I could ever hope to do or be as a tool for God. Because he's going to use me however he wants to, and he'll do with me whatever he will, as long as I cooperate with him. And so that's kind of the way that I approach my interactions with people when conversations about Orthodox versus non-Orthodox come up, because I definitely don't want to proselytize in a way that turns folks off the way that I saw other people proselytize to in the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But so tell me, you mentioned Mary a little bit and about writing about Mary perhaps. And, of course I've already read your book, so I know that there was a struggle with getting to know Mary. And frankly, as a convert myself, I had the same sort of problem. I could accept Orthodoxy and the liturgy and all of this beauty, and I could embrace all of it. And I think for so many of us, the very last thing we can embrace is Mary. And I don't think that has anything to do with Mary. I think it has a lot to do with Catholicism. It has to do with a lot of prejudices. I think we're all born to be suspicious, or we're raised to be suspicious of her, which is so funny to my Orthodox friends. I talk to my Greek friends and they're like, oh, Panagia. And I'm like, yeah, I was really raised to be suspicious of her. And it's so unthinkable to them because she's so lovely. Why would you be specific? Or I'm sorry, suspicious. But we are, we come in like that. Tell me about your experience with that. Because I know, that's what your book's about. And I know so many of our listeners surely are either in the midst of that struggle, or have gone through it themselves. What was that like for you?
Sure. So, there was very little that I had trouble with in terms of converting to Orthodoxy. Very little I had difficulty accepting. Pretty much everything that we talked about in catechism was like, yep, that makes sense. Uh-huh. Okay, check. Yep, I'm on board. That sounds good. And with Mary, I never, quote unquote, had a problem with her. But what I realized over a series of years was that I was really avoiding relationship with her, and I would have quite emotional interactions with her whenever we got around to the time in Great Lent where we sing or we pray the Akathist hymn and things like that. And so the book, to make another long story short, is really about kind of facing that fear and figuring out what's going on with me and what's going on with this relationship with Mary, and what do I need to do not only to understand her better as a convert, but to actively engage relationship with her so that I'm giving her the respect and the love that she deserves, but also so that I can figure out what's going on with me. And I have always, my best friend is Catholic, and I loved growing up around where I live because the Virgin of Guadalupe is very important in my Southwestern Catholic friends' cultures. I've always loved her. I've always been very drawn to this idea of Mary, but really had no background on her. And so in the book, it's basically a spiritual memoir of a year that I spent searching for her. So I did a whole bunch of reading, and pretty much for a year I journaled, and I set out my idea with the book was, okay, I'm going to spend this year kind of documenting what I learned about her and everything. I didn't anticipate having a really bad year, like a really difficult, emotionally challenging year.
Right.
But
I
as
feel
we
like I
know,
met you at the beginning of that year, and I didn't see that
yeah.
coming either. I have to say, you were like, "Yeah, I'm going to really work through this, and I'm going to write through it." And I was like, "Oh, that's nice. I'm sure it'll all be fine."
And then you're like,
Who
kapow,
knew?
right in the face. Yeah. God
But
really
I
got me
love
right
that
in the
about your
kisser.
book, because I feel like there are so many different levels on which you're not just exploring Mary and struggling with Mary, but you're really thinking about motherhood. And I think that
hmm
would be a surprise to our readers if you're someone who is maybe super comfortable with Panagia, with the Theotokos. It's no problem for you. This is really a book about encountering motherhood. I think in terms of you
hmm
and your mom, and your role as a
hmm
mother, and Mary as a mother, and other mother
hmm
figures that are going to come in and out. And I think it was it's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But yeah, so tell us just a little bit. What did you encounter that year that was so unexpected?
Goodness, there were a lot of challenges. So, oh gosh, you hit on exactly, I think, what the ultimate purpose of the book ended up being through Panagia's help, which is to encounter motherhood, because we cannot understand Mary until we understand her role as a mother, until we understand Christ's role as her son. And so throughout that year, it
Ooh.
really started with a foundation, establishing a foundation, first of all, of prayer, because I didn't really know how to pray to her. And so my priest very lovingly walked me through some prayers that I could pray to her. And so what I did is kind of where the title of the book came from, is I started walking off my insomnia that I have very early in the morning. And I would walk down through my neighborhood to a set of playa lakes in a park not far away. And I would walk around there and I would pray. And whenever you start to do things like that, I don't know if you've had this experience or not, but God's going to give you stuff to pray about. There's no energy that's wasted.
Yeah.
He's going to really, he's going to provide opportunities for you to really pray. And so I prayed, and throughout that year, I had a lot of challenges with my mom. She, since my dad has passed, we've had a really difficult relationship, and we had a hard time with a period where we really wanted to help her and wanted her to live with us, and did a lot of work to get her a safe, comfortable home, and it was rejected. And so there was that. There was some death that happened that year. And then it was also a year that my husband and I decided we really want to have a baby. Time's a ticking. And so there was the challenges of whether or not I was going to be able to get pregnant. And then there was the challenges with, is this baby going to be healthy? What's going to happen there? And so to not, give you any spoiler alerts, it was a big year. There was a lot of
Right.
challenges. And through each of those things that happened, I found that I had seasons that were really fruitful in terms of my relationship developing with Mary. And then I had a season of dryness. And that's one of the chapters that I actually included in the book, because this is life, right? We try to engage and have these wonderful prayer rules, and then we fail, and then we try again, and then we fail again, and then we try again, and then we really fail. And so the reality is that it really is a look at a regular person's life. And what do you do in a year of your life when you're trying to develop a relationship with Mary? And I think it's applicable if you're trying to do that with your saint, if you're trying to develop a relationship with Christ, if you're trying to expand really any spiritual encounter or relationships that you want to develop in your life. And so it was a very difficult year, but it was a very wonderful year, and I wouldn't change anything about it. And that's really the basis of what the book is. So it's kind of a memoir interwoven with what I was reading and learning at the time, what I was journaling at the time, and the lessons that I felt like I was learning and being taught at the time. And so if anybody's interested in that,
It's
that sounds like a
beautiful.
good time.
Well, I mean, it's the way that you describe it is very personal, of course, but I found that, well, first of all, because you have such a gift for writing, it's just beautiful, right? Like, as I
Thank
said, you
you.
make West Texas sound like the richest, most amazing, beautiful landscape I've ever heard. It's like, my goodness, what would she do with Hawaii? That's amazing.
Thank you. But Anne Lamott, I don't know if you've read very much of her, but she has this great book on writing called Bird by Bird. And she says in that book that this is our goal as writers, to help others have this source of wonder. This is how we're supposed to be in the world, present and in awe. And that's really how I try to approach my writing projects, and really, as much as I can, although I fail regularly, my daily life, to be present and in awe. Because if we can transcribe some of that wonder that we experience, you live in Austin. I think Austin's super cool. There's all kinds of things. I would love to read something, from your neck of the woods about, how you see the world around you, and what exists and what's alive, and what you interact with on a daily basis, because I think that's where we meet our lives, and that's where we can meet other people in their lives, is in these really small, simple experiences that we hopefully cast in wonder if we are doing a good job as writers.
I think that is absolutely beautiful. And I think that that is exactly what you're doing. I think that the way that you are writing does show this wonderful, you're casting it in wonder. You're showing us, what if I slow down and I feel, the air on my skin, and I look at these birds before me, and I look at this, this tree that has changed throughout the year. It's all, in fact, very beautiful. And I really love that you included the dry period. So many of our Orthodox saints, the Desert Fathers, they talk about you're going to have dry periods. You're going to pray and pray. And sometimes when you pray, it's just going to be amazing. And God hears you, and you've learned something, and something beautiful happens. And sometimes you're going to pray and nothing. And it's your job to keep going, right? And it's just,
Yes.
I love that also in your book. And I also love that it's not like a revelation in the sense that, like, Mary doesn't come to you personally and glow and give you some nugget of
Right.
wisdom, but you find her in other people, and you find
Right.
her in places. I think of the woman with the store, selling handmade artwork and things like that. And
Yes.
it's just, you're finding Mary in experiences of motherhood. You're finding her in other women. And I would say to our audience, in our daily lives, we walk past ponds, and we drive past parks, and we see sunsets, and we meet people, and we have small conversations. But maybe what we need to do is slow down and understand what a miracle each of those things is. And I think
Mhm.
that's what you do so well in this book is that it's not so much that you're having experiences that are so out of the ordinary, or it's just that you're paying attention and that you're in the
Mm.
moment and you're seeing them. And I think it's so lovely and it's very inspiring. Absolutely.
Well, thank
But
you.
it's really neat. But so now that you've written it, what's it like publishing a book? What happens when it comes out? Like, is it, I mean, I will say from my own experience, I can say you write the book and it's like 2 or 3 years before it comes out. So there's that
Uh-huh.
weird delay where everybody's talking about the book like you read it yesterday or wrote it yesterday, and you're like, I don't remember. I'm not sure. It was a while ago. But tell me, how is that experience for you? What's that been like?
Well, I had this wonderful idea and plan in my head about how it was going to go, and then I had a baby, and it was a blur. So, um, there was a fairly quick turnaround between when I turned the book in and we finished final edits on it and it came out, which I was really grateful for. Um,
Wait,
it
actually, that's
was
right. Wait a minute. In the book, the baby is born, right? Do you
yes,
give birth in
yeah.
the book? You do at the end of the book.
Mhm.
How old is your
Mhm.
baby right now?
He's 9 months old. So this like just
Yeah.
happened.
As you're saying that, I'm realizing, wait a minute, how fast so okay,
It was
so the baby's born, and then you're like postpartum and you're turning in a final
Mhm.
transcript. May
For
God
real.
bless you
Yeah. It
and
was
reward
rough.
you richly for this. Holy moly, Brandy, I
Yeah.
never really wow,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Well, there
haven't
you go.
slept in a while.
But I think it's so lovely that your pregnancy did happen during this year of thinking about the Theotokos, because of course that's
Yes.
motherhood, right? You become a mother like she did. And
Yes.
sort of, in that sense of not realizing that you were going to write about what it's like to suddenly find that you're pregnant and to be able to go through that journey.
Exactly.
She didn't know what it was going to be like to all of a sudden have the Holy Spirit come down and make her pregnant with the Lord. So
Exactly.
that's lovely. That is really
There's some
lovely.
pretty like goosebump creating events that happened that year because I feel like I took this project on and probably took it on rather naively and in an unholy state, because I'm gonna write a book about Mary. Let's just see what happens. Oh, you need to pray before you do that, before anybody tries something like that, because, like
Right,
I
you're supposed to
said,
like fast for 40 days. No, but I
yeah,
loved that though, because I remember when we were talking about it, you weren't saying, I had a journey from not knowing and trusting and feeling comfortable with Mary to now having that and I want to write about that. You were like, I don't feel comfortable with Mary and I'm going to spend a year trying. I'm going to
yep,
write it down and publish
exactly.
it. And it was like, well, all right. I mean, if I knew it was going to turn out great, I could tell. But it's just so funny because it's a little audacious.
Yeah, and probably a little, I would say even spiritually foolish to do something like that. But it's what I did, and I wrote about it, and I read, and I really spent that year journaling and focusing a lot, and God makes a way, and he made a way in my life, and like I said, I wouldn't have changed anything about that. If I had written the book and then turned it in, I would have had to rewrite the entire thing the way that I wrote it, because life needed to happen and unfold the way that it did for my relationship with Mary to change the way that it did, and for me to learn what I did. And so, I feel nothing but mercy and grace in that, because as frightening and scary as that was, and as often as I felt like I wasn't doing a good job, um, I think the book came out at a place where it has a slightly unfinished feel, because life is unfinished and this is a journey that I continue to be on, and that readers will continue to be on as well. And so who knows, maybe in another couple of years I'll be able to write a follow-up, or kind of pursue something different along those same lines. But it
I
was a
love that
blessing.
idea. I knew it was going to be great because whether you found her or not, whether you connected with her or not, you're a beautiful writer, and the way that you see things and describe things is great. So it's going to be worthwhile. But I think it's interesting too. I keep thinking about, you mentioned Nuestra Virgen de Guadalupe, right? Like the Virgin of Guadalupe is this vision, for our audience. If you're not from Texas or the Southwest, you may not realize, but in Guatemala, someone had a vision, a peasant, kind of a shepherd kind of guy.
Juan Diego, yes.
Juan
in
Diego.
Mexico.
I was going to say, was it Juan Pedro? Was it Juan Pedro? Okay. He, at any rate, he had a vision of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And so he writes it out, and it's really quite beautiful. But what I love is you didn't have a vision. You know what I mean? Like, it's not
Right.
It's not this super unusual, like you're the one guy that this ever happened to. The things that you went through are things that a lot of us go through. And they're observations that a lot of us should be making and maybe are not paying attention to. So I just think it's very valuable in so many different ways. And I'm so thrilled that you wrote this book, Brandi. I really love it.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you so much for being on the program tonight. It has been an absolute delight to get an opportunity to talk with you, and perhaps we'll have
Thank
another
you.
opportunity maybe on this show or at an airport or wherever. I would love
That
to
would
hang
be
out with you again.
wonderful. I know. We must get together.
Absolutely. Well, Brandi, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you
Thank
to our
you.
audience. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and come back next Sunday night, and we'll have another Everyday Orthodox Christian to introduce you to. Good night.